Good evening, everybody. Um, so tonight is very exciting. We'll be delving into the impact of wind turbines in South Africa, as well as exploring an exciting new mitigation method that's been trialed for the first time in the Western Cape. More exciting though, and we're thrilled to announce that BirdLife South Africa and SANCOB secured a historic victory for the critically endangered penguin when since today the Pretoria High Court issued a historic victory or order following a settlement with the commercial sardine and anchovy porcine fishers endorsed by the state. So this order really establishes a no-take zone around 6 key penguin breeding colonies, which is just fantastic for the species. We are extremely proud of our colleagues who spent months, getting to this historic settlement, and we are extremely grateful for everybody who's been involved to help secure a better future for our penguins. So we look forward to hearing more from our colleagues, and if you want to head over to the link that's shown on the screen to see the press release for more information. But this will obviously not be the last time you hear about it, and I'm sure we'll get all our colleagues and the biodiversity law center on the webinar or conservation conversation, so we can really get an understanding, the process that they followed to get to this historic decision. We also have a follow-up webinar on our bird of the year, the beautiful red-billed oxpecker. So if you would like to get an understanding of the resources that our colleagues have spent months developing, you can also head over to the webpage to register for that webinar. Then in case you've missed an episode of one of the 160 episodes that we have for conservation conversations, you can go to our YouTube channel and catch up on those episodes. So if you subscribe to the channel, you'll receive updates as and when we post. We're also on various other platforms, social media platforms, where we regularly update on the work that we're doing. And we work really hard, the 4 hosts, although how today's webinar started might not indicate how hard I'm working, but I promise that behind the scenes we're working really hard to keep these webinars free as a really great resource for you guys to learn about the work we're doing, as well as our other conservation colleagues. So if you feel inclined to donate to support our efforts, you can do so using various platforms, or you can even just get in touch with us to find out how you can do so. Then, excitingly, why you guys are all here, we will be able to hear about the impact of wind turbines on birds in South Africa, as I said, and to get an insight into this new mitigation method that has been trialed at one site in the Western Cape. As many of us know, thousands of birds are killed annually at Southern African wind farms, yet nearly 25 years ago, American researchers actually proposed a simple solution to reduce blade strikes. So by marking blades in the lab, they found that raptors, which is the most affected group, were more likely to notice black blades than plain white ones. It took another decade for this, though, to be tested in Norway with positive results. And now in South Africa, we are conducting the first global test of color pattern blades to see if they can help reduce fatalities. The Hopefield experiment is nearing completion, and this webinar will provide exciting updates on its findings. So now I'm thrilled to introduce our 2 speakers. The first being Rob. So we'll actually have 2 presentations tonight, one from our colleague Sam Ralston and another from Rob Simmons, both giving insights, into the impact of these turbines on birds, as well as the mitigation method. So Rob is a bit of an academic gypsy with interests ranging from climate change to the evolution of giraffe, to the impacts of domestic cats on biodiversity, to long-term studies of black harriers. He runs the environmental consultancy company called Birds and Bats Unlimited, with his partner Marley, studying and modeling the impacts of renewable energy developments on birds, particularly raptors. So he grew up in the UK, fledged to Canada, and then winged it to Namibia without a GPS tracker back in the day. and he has thrived in Southern Africa for 40 years, completing his PhD in Wits, all in the last millennia. He has an insatiable curiosity for the natural world and for the possibility of life outside the borders of our beautiful planet. Then I also have the privilege of introducing our very own, or my very own BirdLife colleague, Sam, who plays a crucial role in ensuring that renewable energy development and bird conservation really go hand in hand. She works very closely with consulting bird specialists such as Rob, ornithologists, environmental assessment practitioners, government, and the renewable energy industry to ensure that the impacts of this new industry on birds and their habitats are understood, managed, and minimized. With an MSc in conservation biology from the University of Cape Town and over a decade of experience, she really has been a driving force in promoting nature-friendly transition to renewable energy. Her dedication to this cause was recognized in 2023 when she was awarded the Mail and Guardian Greening the Future Award. Sam is passionate about environmental sustainability and enjoys challenging herself and other people to have a more positive impact on the planet. So thank you, guys. We look forward to hearing all about the work that you guys are spearheading.
Evening, everybody. Before I start my presentation, I just also want to take the opportunity to say a huge congratulations to my colleagues, the penguinologists and the Biodiversity Law Centre. I think settlements like this, litigation like this, has such a profound impact on all of our work. And I'm going to be talking about wind energy, and just really to set the scene to introduce Rob's talk about blade patterning. He's really the star of the show. And some of you might have noticed that wind farms in South Africa have been getting a bit of bad press lately. So in my presentation, I'm going to be really talking about, is this bad press justified? On the more positive side, what is actually being done to address bird collisions with wind turbines in South Africa? And then I'm going to hand over to Rob, who's going to be talking about blade patterning as a potential solution. So a lot of the bad press recently came from the release of this report, which is a report that BirdLife South Africa has drafted, and it's really a summary of the outcome of bird monitoring South Africa. So this report was based on operational phase monitoring from 33 wind farms. The wind farms are required to monitor their impacts on birds and bats, and part of the work that they do is carcass surveys. The data spanned almost 4,000 turbine years, and by this I mean a turbine was surveyed at least monthly for a year. And the report includes almost 2,500 unique bird fatality incidents. And what this report does, it includes a whole bunch of data, including estimated fatality rates for birds from turbine collisions. So not just the birds that are observed beneath the turbines, but calculations to estimate which birds might have been missed, scavenged, overlooked because of the survey protocols. And we're only able to do this for all species, not at a combined, not at a species level. Then the report also includes, and I have to highlight, minimum fatality rates for large species of conservation concern. So things like cranes and raptors. Where we had the data available, we could also provide some information about the location of the carcasses and the season when the fatalities were observed. Quite useful information is also included in the details. So we included case studies of what happened at different wind farms with different species, including where there was mitigation implemented, how that was going. Unfortunately, at the time of writing the report, the blade patterning study was only nearing completion, or nearing the first year of completion. So we didn't include a lot of detail in that. So I'm really excited that Rob's able to share that here. And then the report includes recommendations for research, recommendations for wind energy developers, as well as policy and implementation. So it's the bad news justified. So the report contains some quite concerning statistics. I'm just going to pull out a couple of them. So around 10% of the carcasses found beneath the turbines, that was 213 actual fatalities, were of species of conservation concern. That's not necessarily a reflection of the overall balance, because some smaller birds are less easy to observe or might be decayed to a point of not being recognizable by the time that the surveys are done. Around 30% of those carcasses were of raptors. And this is where I get more concerned, is that 82% of wind farms reported at least one species of conservation fatality concern due to turbine collisions. Excuse me. The wind farms that had no species of conservation concern fatalities either had very few turbines, they were small wind farms, or data was only available for a short period, in total less than 24 turbine years. Sorry, I've got a terrible cough. Apologies for that. Bad timing. And what our data also shows is that although individual wind farms might not be having significant impacts on individual species, the cumulative impacts, when you pool all the different wind farms together, are already at levels of concern for some of our species of conservation concern. For example, black harrier, Burroughs eagle, Cape vulture, and Marshall eagle. And I want to add jackal buzzard here as well. Although it's not a threatened species, it is endemic, and it's by far the species. What was also really common is that there are ongoing losses of species of conservation concern at some wind farm, despite legal requirements to address those significant losses. So that's where the bad press came from. But it's not all bad news. And I think it's important to give credit where credit is due. I think South Africa is doing wonderfully in that wind farms are actually monitoring their impacts and they are reporting those impacts. And that is no small undertaking. They need a team of staff and specialists to undertake that work. And it really is phenomenal that we've managed to get that right. And armed with this information, we can improve project planning and mitigation at newly proposed wind farms, really promoting that evidence-based decision making. We can also encourage relevant research, so prioritize research into the species that are being affected. And it's so important to acknowledge that some wind farms really are leading the way by proactively and sometimes entirely voluntarily implementing and testing mitigation measures. And I think blade patterning is one of those examples. And BirdLife South Africa is working with the South African Wind Energy Association, the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, and other stakeholders to produce guidelines and resources to help resolve challenges. For example, we've produced guidelines on blade patterning with the Wind Energy Association, a guideline on shut-on on demand, which is another mitigation measure that can be implemented during operation. That handbook is going to be released soon. And we also have been hosting information sharing sessions with the likes of DFFE, Impact Assessment Association, etc. And if any of you online are interested in getting those resources, you can go to our website following that code there. And it's really important to have and throw one's hands up in the air and think, we've got this terrible crisis of biodiversity loss. But we also need to bear in mind we are facing a twin crisis. We also have climate change, which is a major issue that we need to tackle. And we cannot be tackling climate change if it's resulting in biodiversity loss. And we can't be stopping climate change mitigation measure if we don't take biodiversity into consideration. So we need to tackle those two crises together. And underpinning this all is this essential need to ensure human health and well-being, not just today, but for the children in the future. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Rob, and also just to say a big thank you to all the bird specialists, the field staff, the wind energy facility, the environmental assessment practitioners and decision makers who all helped ensure that monitoring was conducted at those wind farms and made reports available to BirdLife South Africa. And of course, also to our funders, particularly the Foundation, who's I'm going to hand over to you, Rob. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sam. Hope you can hear me and see me. I'm sure that I was the one who jinxed Jess when she was starting out. We were working for about 50 minutes to get my presentation up and running, and please let me know if you can now see it. Cool. All right. So Sam has set the scene very nicely there. We have been running an experiment with Amoyo Energy at the Hopefield Wind Farm. And tonight's talk, I'm just going to touch on some of those early results from that. Let's see if I can get this to actually move. It's stuck very nicely on this opening slide, of course. Let me try something else. One. All right. Wind farms are, of course, a green solution to the global climate change issue that Sam alluded to. And as you've seen, she said the South African wind farms are actually getting bad press. And one of the reasons for that is that of the 33 wind farms that she's just done a great review of, they have 1,350 operational turbines. And each of those turbines, on average, are killing about between 4 and 5 birds per year. Some of them are killing less than one bird at certain wind farms, and some of them are killing as many as 50 birds per year. And that means the cumulative impacts over the year for all of these 1,350 turbines is about 5,700 birds per year. And as Sam has said, the really big issue, 5,700 birds is not a huge number when one considers all of the other impacts on our birds, like birds being killed on the road, for example. Birds are being affected by climate change itself and losing habitat and habitat degradation. But for wind farms, the big issue here is that 10% of the birds which are being killed are threatened species, and 30% of those are raptors, and especially martial eagles, black harriers, and Cape vultures. If you were to play devil's advocate, you might say, well, what's the problem with killing a few extra eagles or killing a few extra harriers or vultures? Are these fatalities actually having an influence on the populations itself? And it's a really difficult question to answer because we actually don't have very accurate figures on total populations or declines. However, for black harriers, it happens that we do through a good friend of mine, Apache Cervantes. He did a population modeling exercise for black harriers with our help, and he found that the world population was only 1,300 individuals. Now, I thought I would dwell on that figure of 1,300 with a few other black and blue species, including, let's say, black rhinos, for example. Black rhinos, there are about 6,500 individuals in the world. For blue cranes, there are about 35,000 individuals in the world. For blue swallows, there are about 1,000 to 2,000 pairs in the world. Even for penguins, which we've just heard of, which such brilliant news that Jess told us at the start, they have about 20,000 individuals, but have declined enormously. We're talking about black harriers with a tiny population, 1,300 individuals, and they are declining at 2% per year. Patch's most important modeling finding was that if we were to lose an extra 3 to 5 birds at wind farms per year, then the population will go extinct in 75 to 100 years. So let's take a look at this. I can move this out the way. Let's go and do that. You won't be able to see me anymore, possibly. Never mind. So if we were to kill an extra 3 adults per year, the population, if you can see my cursor here, would be declining from 1,300 birds, and in 100 years, the population would go extinct. If that increased to 5 adult birds per year, then the population would be flatlining at 75 years from now. That is a very, very troubling result, and it's really troubling because Sam's review showed that we're already killing wind farms in South Africa, already killing 3.6 black harriers on average per year. So in answer to the question, are our wind farms negatively impacting some species? The answer is definitely yes for black harriers, and that means we have a zero tolerance for wind farms killing any more black harriers, as you see that bird with a tag on it at one of the wind farms. So what are we doing about this, or what are the managers doing about this? Well, there are several ways. There are 4 ways of mitigating other than simply avoiding the areas. One of those is a so-called SDOD, or shutdown on demand. This is where a very sophisticated camera system, video system, identifies the species, detects it, identifies it with its AI library, and then automatically stops the turbines if it detects that the bird is going to collide with the turbine. In a test of this, there was an 82% reduction using this system for golden eagles in the United States. It's very popular among wind energy facilities. That's what the WEF stands for there in the US and in Europe, but it is extremely expensive. It's about R1,000,000 per turbine. And I converted that from a euros costing that I learned. It's very difficult to get that costing, but that's roughly what it costs in rands. So African wind farms have gone more for a human observer-based shutdown on demand. This means there's a team of people dotted around the wind farm looking for the collision-prone species, be it vultures in Kenya, be it migrant species in Egypt, be it Cape vultures and black harriers in Overberg and Jeffreys Bay. Unfortunately, the one in Jeffreys Bay has now come to an end. So as Libby Hirschon will tell you, there's been a 100% reduction for some of the larger species like Cape vultures using the observer-led, but it is lower for the smaller species. And for the smaller species, I'm talking about black harriers in particular. Those observer-led systems, unfortunately for them, the black harrier is a very difficult species. It flies low to the ground. Sometimes, and it's dark and it's easily overlooked. And 3 or 4 individuals at both of those farms in the Overberg and Jeffreys Bay have been killed despite the observer program. There's also a curtailment program where behavioral research can identify certain seasons or certain times of day, and especially certain weathers when the majority of the risky flights might occur. That's when the turbines should simply be turned off if those conditions are met, whether there's a bird in the air or not. This is very common for bats. It's called a cut-in speed. Bats generally don't fly in wind speeds more than about 5 meters per second. So a wind turbine operator is not allowed to spin its blades in anything between 0 meters per second and 4 to 5 meters per second. Above that, then it can cut in and it can spin the turbines. Of course, for birds, it's the opposite way around. Birds tend to be flying in windy conditions. So we've got to identify the times and the seasons when those birds are flying and then shut down the turbines at such times. Now, the whole point of this evening's seminar is to talk about the pattern blades. That is to simply go for a non-technological solution, and that is to get the birds to see the wind turbine blades. Very simple, but it's taken a long time to get to this point. We can pattern the blades. We don't talk about painting blades because all blades are painted. We talk about patterning them either with black or with red, and it targets all species, not just the larger species. And there are minimal costs if it's painted in the lab. It's taken a long time for us to get to this point, partly because there were experiments being done way back in 2001, starting with Hugh McIsaac. He tested the little American kestrel on the right there, their behavioral responses in the lab, and then William Hodos came along and tested retinal responses of kestrels. And his big idea was to reduce motion smear. That's the inability of the retina to detect movement of a fast spinning object, just like when you see a spinning propeller blade of a plane. It's very difficult to actually see movement there, and very often people have walked into those propeller blades. So what Hugh McIsaac did was to have 3 blades that he spun around, and he asked of the American kestrels from a behavioral point of view, which one was the most conspicuous for them. And he found that pattern number 4 was the most conspicuous. And guess which one was the least conspicuous? Yes, you've guessed it, pattern number 1, which 99.9% of wind turbines across the world are using. William Hodos, he used various patterns, but the one that came out top gave the biggest response from a retinal point of view, was painting a single one of the 3 blades completely black, solid black, as in this case, and he got the best response from his anesthetized American kestrels. It wasn't until about 10 years later that this was actually taken up. And that's because those studies were not actually published. They were internal reports within the National Renewable Energy Lab, internal reports. And so it wasn't until the Norwegians happened across those reports in 2013, and they did the first field experiment in a place called Smaller, which has a lot of these white-tailed eagles. They were killing very large numbers of these eagles per year, I think on average 6 per year, and they used the Hodos design to see if they could reduce that. So they painted 1 black blade on 4 turbines, so a single blade on 4 turbines to test if they could reduce the white-tailed eagle fatality. They were very successful. They did reduce the fatalities by 72% compared for all birds. And the really good news was the eagle fatalities were reduced 100% at the turbines with the painted blades. You'll see the bird lying there, still alive, has a traumatic injury. Its left wing has been completely severed from its body, and this is a characteristic of birds which have been hit by turbines traveling at up to 350 kilometers per hour. And they always have these or often have these traumatic injuries. So we undertook, as soon as we heard about this, we were working with a Moyo wind farm in Hopefield, and we recommended that they tried this as a new mitigation technique. So we took the 2 broad stripes of McIsaac's experiment and combined it with the single marked blade of the Hodos experiment to increase the likelihood that the birds would see the blades. In August 2022, Moyo received the approval from Civil Aviation Authority to paint white blades with the signal red stripes. Now, black is not allowed on any tall structures. It's got nothing to do with apartheid. The Civil Aviation Authority simply do not allow black. They don't think that pilots flying overhead will see black as well as they do signal red. The next time you go past a cell phone tower, check out the signal red patterning on it, and that's the loophole that we dived through in order to get through this through Civil Aviation, who were by far and away the hardest nut to crack. So Moyo painted a single blade on 4 turbines in situ. I did ask if 10 turbines and 10 blades could be painted. That wasn't possible. They used the aerial platform shown in the picture to the left, and the cost of that was 2.4 million rands. That wasn't because the paint was that expensive, it was because the aerial platform was up there for 3 months, because for safety reasons we couldn't have people, and Moyo couldn't have people up there in windy conditions, and it's a wind farm. So the aerial platform was there for 3 months, painting just 4 blades. The original equipment manufacturers, Vestas, agreed to maintain the warranty as is for the pattern blades. And here it is. The blade is 50 meters long. It's 9,000 kilos, amazingly. And the first quarter was painted red, the second quarter white, third quarter red, and the last quarter white. And that's what you see there. So let's have a look at the effects of the displayed painting versus the 16 unpainted controls. So let's concentrate on the left-hand graph there, the number 13, the grey bar there, are the number of fatalities at the unpainted, 4 unpainted blades before they were patterned. The 2 there is the number of fatalities after those 4 turbines were patterned. The one on the left is after 24 months. The one on the right is after 22 months. We've still got 2 months to go. So the question immediately arises, well, hang on, is it because there are no birds around the wind farm and no birds being killed by the unpatterned turbines? And the answer to that is not for the 16 controls. We had 26 fatalities before the patterning of their neighbours, and we still had 14 fatalities after the patterning of their neighbours. And raptors and other birds were still being killed, in other words, at the control turbines. A better comparison is actually the nearest neighbours, and that is because they share the same environment, they share the same habitat, the same wind. You know, some of those other controls could be 2 kilometers away. These are literally right next door, the closest neighbors to the pattern blade. So once again, we see that after the patterning, the number of fatalities dropped to just 2. We expected 12 fatalities at the same rate. There were still birds being killed before in the grey and after in the red there at the nearest neighbours. So again, we know that there are birds still flying around and they're still being killed by the controlled turbines. A question that arose, and Roll May in his paper on the black blade, he asked the question, well, are birds who are seeing these turbines, and they clearly are seeing the turbines and avoiding them, could they be diverted away into the nearby controls? So we tested for that. On the left there are the nearest neighbours in green. And if birds were being diverted away from the pattern blades, which don't appear in this graph, and into the nearest neighbours, the gold bar there with 5 above it would be very much higher. It would be 9 or 10 if birds were veering away. And we compared that with the controls, the other controls, the 12 remaining controls, and you see the ratios are very similar there, and there was no significant difference. So we could conclude that birds were not veering away. They were veering away, but they weren't veering in to the nearest neighbours. So let's have a quick look at the sort of species that are on the wind farm, live species to start with. We have 93 species which have been recorded on the wind farm site at Hopefield. That includes 14 species of raptors. So we've found 2 species of harrier, 4 species of eagle, 2 species of buzzard, and the jackal buzzard, Sam mentioned there, the jackal buzzard is the most impacted, is most often killed. 146 individual jackal buzzards have been killed by wind farms since records began, since about 2014. So 2 species of buzzard, 2 species of falcon. The peregrine that you've probably recognized on the right there is a juvenile African peregrine. So the fastest animal in the world is not fast enough to avoid a spinning blade. Spinning, the tip spins at about 320 to 350 kilometers per hour. And we had 2 species of kites and two species of owls. So for the fatalities, of the 14 raptor species, 10 of them have been killed at the wind farm. For individual fatalities, we've had 97 fatalities, and 23% of those were raptors. Of the total number of species killed is 26, and 10 of those, or 38% of those, were raptors. So whichever way you look at it, raptors are being impacted in a major way here, and that is a common theme throughout many parts of the world. For whatever reason, raptors are being impacted by wind turbines. So after the patterning of the 4 turbine blades, the 7 raptor fatalities declined to just 1 yellow-billed kite fatality in 22 months. There are still fatalities happening at the control turbines. So that includes, unfortunately, the red data black harrier, the peregrine you see on the right there, and the black-shotted kites, 2 black-shotted kites in 22 months. Thus, if you do the maths, there's an 86% reduction for the raptors and an 85% if you include all birds after the patterning of the blades. So the question still remains, why are raptors so impacted by spinning blades? They're well known for their high acuity. Let's put that in that corner. In other words, to see objects from far away. Experiments have shown that an eagle can see an object 4 to 5 times further away than we can. And one of the examples that was given, a raptor can see an ant on the ground from the top of a 10-story building. A 10-story building is about 35 meters away. So tomorrow in the daylight, you go and see if you can see an ant even from 10 meters away. These birds can see it from 35 meters away. And why can they do that? Because at the back of their eye, their retina is packed with these little color receptors called cones. And with those within the back of the eye, there's 2 so-called fovea, which are pits in the back of the eye, which are even more densely packed with these little cones. For humans, we have a very shallow fovea with a low density of the cone receptors. So the raptors are using this very high density of cone receptors to see objects from very far off. The main difference is there's a lack of the black and white rod receptors that humans possess in the raptor retina. So this has some very surprising consequences, which has only come to light recently. And they see contrast, not acuity, but contrast 10 times less well than humans. And that's because there's been this trade-off between the color cones for the high acuity and they've dropped out through evolution. They've dropped out the black and white rods. And the obvious consequence of that, so I'm going to move this around here. The obvious consequence of that is they will unlikely detect a white blade against a bright background because it's compromised by the very structure of the eye. Now, Molly and I, when we were on the Jeffreys Bay wind farm, we actually witnessed a martial eagle being struck by a blade. As a young martial eagle just been pestered by some jackal buzzards, had been forced down to about 100, 120 meters, and it started to gain height. And as it did, it flew into a wind turbine blade, and it took no evasive action whatsoever. It just simply did not detect this wind turbine blade. And we worked out that another wind turbine blade must have been in front of it 2.6 seconds before it, and it didn't see that one, and it didn't see the one that struck it in the side and killed it instantaneously. So it appears that raptors are simply not detecting a white blade against a bright background. What I haven't told you is there was quite a lot hanging off the results of blade patterning Hopefield. The Civil Aviation Authority were going to give the green light only if we showed good results at the Hopefield wind farm, having got their special permission to go and paint 4 of the turbine blades with the signal red paint. However, given that we got the green light, SAWIA, the South African Wind Energy Association, and BirdLife, we did a lot of work. Sam and I started this process in 2017, talking to civil aviation, but that's a long story. Since then, we got the green light for other wind farms in South Africa to pattern their blades, as in the Hopefield experiment, and both SAWIA and BirdLife have actively encouraged wind farms to use this particular mitigation. And they have issued these guidelines. A lot of us helped put these guidelines together, and they have to be very, very particular because CAA are a tough lot, I have to say. They do not allow black, and they will only allow certain designs which have been proven to be good for reducing fatalities. So this is quite a small diagram, but I hope you can see it. This is what the crux of what the guidelines are suggesting. Figure number 1, like the Hopefield one, you can paint with signal red or a similar red two broad stripes on one of the blades. You can do, as the smaller experiment in Norway did, paint one of the blades completely with signal red. Figure 3 is a very interesting one because we're looking at a checkered pattern there where one of the patterns is staggered in relation to the next blade coming around. So a bird would see a red, then a white, then a red, then a white. Figure 4 is the problem child. We've put a cross next to that. We do not recommend that. These are called aviation stripes. They're very popular overseas. They're actually for pilots, they're not for birds. They're to say to pilots, you're flying near a wind farm, or indeed there's an airport nearby. There's 2 or 3 little stripes on the end there on each of the blades. And we do not recommend that. It's a bit of a problem child because there are some wind farms in South Africa that have snuck under the radar and already have these civil aviation stripes, should I say. We do not know if they are going to stop birds from impacting the blades, and I guess we will see. One of the positives that has come out of this is that the Mpumalanga province have already, through Dadelia, who advise government on environmental matters, they've recently advised that all future wind farms in Mpumalanga province must have pattern blades, and that comes from its director, Robin Late. And she is to be commended for that. I gave a seminar just last week, a webinar to Cape Nature, and I challenged Cape Nature to do similar to the Mpumalanga province because I think they're really leading the way here. One of the businessmen who saw one of my talks on this when I first gave it described the idea of blade patterning as a no regrets investment. It's simple, it's effective, and inexpensive. He liked it as a businessman. I like it as a biologist. Before we get complacent, however, we do need more tests in different environments and with different species. For the sharp-eyed among you, you will have seen that there are no Cape vultures and no Vero's eagles, and they are big-time collision fatality victims at especially Eastern Cape wind farms. In fact, they lead the race. I think there are 41 Cape vultures that have been killed and more Vero's eagles. We haven't tested it yet, but there is a test just starting up in Dar where they've had, unfortunately, many fatalities of Vero's eagles where they are testing the pattern blade idea. So let's have a quick recap, a quick summary. Sam's review showed that there are 4 to 5 fatalities per turbine per year. That in itself is not big news. The big news is that 10% of those are threatened species. Jackal buzzards lead that because they're most often killed, 146. But what does that mean for the population viability? Are they going to be seen in future years? We've tested that with one species, the black harrier, and we know from Patchy's work that an increase of 3 to 5 extra birds killed per year will result in extinction in 75 to 100 years. And already the number of fatalities is at 3.6 per year from Sam's review. The mitigations to reduce such fatalities are critical to reduce those avian fatalities, especially for species like black harriers. So automated shutdown has been tested. It's very successful at reducing eagle deaths, but for other species, not so successful. It's very expensive. So for observer-led, that is very much more popular in Africa, tried it at least 4 wind farms. It is successful with large species, but it's still killing smaller species. And by that, I mean black harriers. Blade patterning has proven to be successful in both Norway and at Hopefield, and I hope it plays a big role in future years. It's inexpensive and it reduces fatalities by between 72% to 85% for all birds, and at least in Norway, 100% for the eagles that it was killing there. The Mpumalanga province is leading the way in making it mandatory for all future wind farms to be built with pattern blades. I challenge Cape Nature again to follow suit. And even though blade patterning is a no regrets investment, we do need more tests elsewhere, different environments and with different species. I wanted to say a very big thank you to the Amoya Energy team. Sabri, hidden by me there, Nicole, Ryan and Jacques, they really stuck their necks out when we came along and said, we want to pattern some of your blades to see if it will reduce the number of eagles that are raptors which are being killed. A big thank you, big shout out to Sam and to John and to the Sawia group. Even CAA came to the party after a while. I missed out Meg Murgatroyd of Hawkwatch International, sorry Meg, and then CAA, they came to the party as well. And thanks to the carcass searching team and especially to all of the academics, including guys like Professor Graham Martin Rolme, Hugh McIsaac, Simon Poitier and Graham Taylor. So I'm very happy to answer any questions. And thanks to Julia, my daughter, who's listening in, for doing the little video for me there in the right-hand corner. Back to you,
Great.
Jess.
Thanks, Rob and Sam. Thank you for sharing those insights. And as you can see, everybody thoroughly enjoyed just getting a different perspective of what's happening on the wind farms and the mitigation methods that are being applied. Just encouraging everybody watching, if you do have questions, please fill those in the Q&A chat box. Sam has indicated that she would actually like to answer the first question, which is actually the report that she's also shared in the chat, the report as well as the blade patterning guidelines. Those are downloadable from the chat, so please go have a look at that. But Gavin Cowden has asked whether that report takes into account the various mitigation methods that Rob has actually mentioned, or are these fatality figures pre-mitigation measures? Sam?
Great, thanks. Apologies, I'm going to keep my video off just because I believe that my bandwidth was not great. So, good question, Gavin. The overall figures that I have spoken about and presented, those are all wind farms put together in one big pool. So some of them are implementing shutdown on demand, some of them aren't, some of them started it a few years later, and some of them are doing it, but doing it very badly. Only one was actually doing blade patterning, and I'll need to double check. I don't think I had data from that. I had only data from the first year before blade patterning was in there. But that's where the case studies come in really handy. So I'll describe mitigation measures and challenges for shutdown on demand in particular, and how it's working and where it's not working and why it's not working. And then I'll also explain some case studies for species, for example, Cape vultures. But quite honestly, at this stage, I don't think we have wind farms that have been monitoring for long enough doing shutdown on demand or blade patterning to be able to pull the results and have conclusive evidence whether it's working on a national scale yet. But lots of implementation challenges with that as well.
Great, thank you, Sam. Actually, just to piggyback off of that question, when you said the monitoring hasn't been taking place long enough, what, in your guys' opinion, what would be long enough to determine, whether these mitigation methods are as effective as we hope them to be?
Jess, I can have a stab at that question if you like. I know, for example, that the Norwegians took 3.5 years in order to get significant results. We're doing it for 2 years. We would prefer to do it for longer. To answer your question, I think it would be prudent to do the post-construction monitoring for probably a minimum of 5 years. I can hear all of the wind farm managers gasping at that one, but I think, as a scientist, you've got to have data to prove this, and especially the broad spread that I was referring to in different environments with different species. Only then can we really say anything.
Yeah.
If I can jump in there.
Go for it, Sam.
I think it also depends on what question we want to ask. So we could ask the question, is blade patterning reducing overall fatality rates? That we might get to fairly quickly, but the challenge is that fatalities are actually quite rare events. But if we want to ask the question, is it reducing fatality rates of a specific species? That's where we need a lot more data. And when you have fatality rates of 0.05 birds per turbine per year, you need a lot of data to convince and me demonstrate that it's working or not.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Sam. And on the data front, as citizen scientists or those even tuning in to get an understanding what is happening, how can we, as citizen scientists or those who love birds and want to make an impact on the environment, how can we contribute to monitoring efforts or reducing the impact that wind farms have on birds?
Should I take this one, Rob? Yeah, I think the role citizen scientists can play is mostly in supporting the planning of proposed wind energy facilities, both through doing atlasing, the data that they submit for to BirdLife, for example. It's a phenomenal resource that really helps us understand where species are in the environment and can help us place turbines and wind farms in the right place. BirdLife South Africa also has this challenge where we are often included as a stakeholder where there are proposed wind energy facilities, but we do not have the capacity to comment on each and every proposed wind energy facility. So if you know of a proposed development in your area and you have particular concerns, it can be incredibly helpful either to engage in that process yourself and say, I've got local knowledge, there's a nest there, or these wetland species here, or if you're really concerned that things are going wrong, please do draw our attention to that, and we will try and support you.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Yeah, we're always encouraging people to get involved in atlasing and sub-up to efforts. And as Rob was indicating, we just don't have enough population estimates to understand the impacts that not only wind farms, but every other development that's being introduced into the environment. You know, what is that large-scale impact on various species? So we've actually had, and I see Sam would like to answer that, we've had 2 questions about audio devices and whether that could have mitigation results for birds. So instead of painting or shut down on demand, could we use audio devices to deter birds from wind farms?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, that's a really good suggestion. And I love that a 9-year-old is thinking of creative solutions. It is something that is implemented at some wind farms. It's normally associated with some sort of camera device, and it will emit a sound. And if that doesn't work, then they'll implement shutdown on demand. We're really nervous of that being implemented as a standalone solution. For the reason is that it hasn't been proved to be effective in all circumstances, and it's likely to be site and species specific. And there's also a concern that birds might become habituated to the noise and end up ignoring it. So it's a potential part of the solution, but at best it's likely to reduce impact slightly. Rob, do you want to add anything there?
No, I'm actually looking at the other questions now. There are so many good questions here that my mind is already fizzing here. But Sam, sorry, no, you go for it.
Yeah, I think Sam answered that one. Thanks for that, Sam. Well, Rob, since you're going through the questions, is there one of those that stand out that you would like to answer?
Well, from Ariane Shard, if I've got the name right, Ariane, do you have a comparison of the direct or indirect of the effectiveness of the patterns in the figures 1, 2, and 3, which we showed? We don't, unfortunately. Listen, a lot of this is still at the planning stage, is still at the theoretical stage, and what I didn't mention is, in the field, we don't have that, but there are 2 very, very important lab experiments going on as we speak. One at Oxford and one in Montpellier, where they're testing red paint, they're testing black paint, they're testing checkered patterns, they're testing the patterns that I showed you, and they're testing even longitudinal patterns as well. And I can't give you those results, even though I know them, because they're unpublished stuff. But it's fascinating how birds see the world. What I would say is that, the idea that birds of prey see contrast 10 times less well than we do, it is actually being tested by patterning your blades and seeing birds are now avoiding them. It basically shows that a bird isn't seeing a blade, because once you give it more contrast, then it will see it and then it will avoid it. But there are some very clever people doing some lab experiments to test those. But Ariane, to answer your question, we don't have those answers right at this very moment.
Thanks so much for that, Rob. Very it's very exciting, and yeah, it gives one hope to know that there are, like you say, the clever people doing additional research, and we look forward to, yeah, hearing the results. So we'll definitely have Rob back on conservation conversations to try
Did I
explain those
say I was going
results.
to come back after all the glitches that I?
So I'd say maybe I won't present, but we'll have somebody else who can figure out Zoom. Yeah, welcome you back. I think, we are slowly running out of time, but I'm sure Sam and Rob would be very willing to go through your guys' questions and, answer them, and we can definitely, put it on our webpage for you guys to go have a look at. I think most of us would be interested to know, what's next. On the Moya farm, are they going to be painting more turbines? Have others jumped up or raised their hand to say they are willing to be a test site, to increase the area where you are monitoring, to also see what the impact is
Jesse,
on various other
yeah.
species. You did
You,
mention
you
to
ask,
R.
you raise a very important you raise an important point there, because there's a lot of wind farms who are convinced by this are simply patterning 100% of their turbines. They don't want us specialists to come along, we specialists to come along later and say, oh, you killed a black harrier at your control turbine. You've now got to paint that, and it's going to cost them more. So, within the Birds and Renewable Energy Specialist Group that Sam heads up, we've had so many conversations about this. We want to conserve birds, of course, but we also want to test it elsewhere. And to test it elsewhere, you have to kill birds at control turbines. Basically, that's the bottom line. Unfortunately, I hate to say it out loud, but we need developers out there to be part of a larger experiment, a experiment, as you'll know what that means, and because having one experiment in Hopefield and one experiment on the island of Smaller is not enough. There are others coming through in De Aar in South Africa. There's one on the Dutch coast at a place called Imshaven, and there's one coming up online in Wyoming. Where all of those, however, have the large black blade of the Hodos design, and they don't have the striped blades. So we're still, other than De Aar, we're still the only one that's done the striped blades. But we do need other developers. If there's any watching out there, please talk to us about doing the experiment, because we need the controls to compare with the blade pattern, the patterned blades.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Rob. And yeah, it's definitely important for those who are involved in the industry, to join the conservation efforts to really reduce the impact that at least one of the industries is having on our birds as well as bats. So maybe just one last question, because a few have asked about bats. And although, it wasn't presented on, but, are there any monitoring efforts taking place to determine the impact that wind farms are having on bats, and whether the blade patterning is also reducing mortality rates on the species?
There's a very simple answer to that, Jessa, and that is many bats are being killed, 10 times as many bats as birds, but bats see the world in a different way. You will know they use echolocation, so blade patterning, we didn't even test it, which was perhaps an oversight, because I know the American guys in Wyoming are actually going to test to see if the blade pattern, the solid blade pattern that they're using is effective against bats. But you need detection dogs. It's very difficult to find a little 10-gram bat, under a turbine in vegetation. You need a detection dog, and we used human observers on a weekly basis. There's an anonymous person who asked a particular question, which I think is very good. Black patterning might be, for countries where black patterning might be allowed, is there a reason to expect black patterning to work better than a red one? Theoretically, the answer is yes, because all the theoreticians say you've got to increase maximally the contrast, and a black versus next to a white is maximum contrast. Red versus white is slightly less contrast, even though raptors see very well in color. And at the moment, it's sort of neck and neck. But as you asked Sam and myself at the beginning, have we got enough experiments? No, we don't have half enough experiments to know if red patterning or black patterning is working best to reduce fatalities.
Yeah. And maybe one last question, because it was also asked, and you did mention the cost that's involved in painting the blades, once they've already been put up. With you guys being in the industry, is there appetite, even though the results aren't conclusive, is there appetite from existing wind farms that they are willing to put up that mass expense to start painting their blades, or are they first willing to undertake other mitigation methods?
There's two answers to that question, Sam, if I may. So I keep on interrupting here. If you've got an operational wind farm, you have to get your paint up 80 or 90 meters. If you're starting a new build wind farm, you just do it in the factory, and it is much less expensive. The 2.4 million that I mentioned there is because they had that aerial platform up for 3 months. If you do it in the factory, it costs whatever 24 kilos of paint costs, which is minimal. It's going to be it's going to be minimal. So it depends where we're doing it on an operational or a new build. Sam, go for it.
Sorry, I was on mute there. I was just going to add that there are wind farms in advanced stages of planning, and it's generally seen to be I think less expensive and less risky than things like shutdown on demand. But we're waiting with bated breath to see it be implemented.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, guys. I think we'll wrap up now, even though there are lots of questions still coming through. But like I said, I'm sure Sam and Rob would be very happy to go through those questions and answer them as best as they can, because this is an ongoing issue, and I think it's good that people are invested in trying to understand what are people doing to mitigate, and asking these questions also encourages individuals like myself and you guys listening to get involved. There are various ways to get involved in understanding our impact on the natural world. So with that, I will end our presentation. A big thank you to Sam and Rob for giving up your evening to present on the vital work that you both are doing, and we thank you for your efforts, and we look forward to following the results and just the continued work that you guys are doing.
Thanks, Jess, and thanks for the opportunity to you and your colleagues at Conservation Conversations for this forum. It allows us to reach the public and to explain things and to answer your questions. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for your attention.
Great. Thanks everybody. Have a good evening.